Welcome to Existential Drips. What do you see in front of you? Is it reality or is it a constructed illusion shaped by millions of years of evolution? And moreover, what are your representations based or made of? Matter or consciousness? This essay explores the work of controversial contemporary neuroscientist and cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman, as well as his colleagues. The implications of his work are deep, for it is an explication of how science, if anything, points to something beyond the territory it deals with. It also suggests how science can agree with spiritual traditions, in which perception is nothing but an observer delineating and measuring the world. Something which Buddhists and Hindu traditions have long attested to, that the world we perceive is but a mapping, or in their language, Maya. And as the Upanishad speaks to, observers have an uncanny relationship to the ground of being, which itself is closer to consciousness than anything else. So according to Donald Hoffman and his colleagues, evolution through the process of natural selection has meticulously sculpted our biological systems, including our sensory apparatus, over countless generations. It has long been assumed that evolution favored accurate perceptions, granting organisms a truer understanding of their environment. However, this seemingly intuitive notion has been challenged by the work of scientists like Donald, who posit a radical alternative. Evolution has not endowed us with perceptual systems designed to reveal the fundamental nature of reality. Instead, our senses have evolved to provide us with a species-specific interface, a simplified representation of the world, tailored for the sole purpose of survival and reproduction. Hoffman's interface theory of perception offers a compelling framework for understanding this evolutionary deception. According to it, our perceptions function much like the icons on a computer desktop. These icons do not provide a literal depiction of the complex underlying software and hardware. Rather, they are useful symbols that allow us to interact with the computer efficiently to achieve our goals. Similarly, our perceptions, the sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and textures we experience are not veridical representations of an objective reality. Instead, they are species-specific symbols, icons, if you will, that guide our behavior within our ecological niche, effectively hiding the true complexity of the world. This perspective suggests that the initial assumption that a more accurate perception invariably leads to better navigation and thus enhanced survival might be fundamentally flawed. Hoffman contends that a simplified, fitness-focused perception can often be far more advantageous in the evolutionary arena. The desktop interface analogy, while providing a value entry point into understanding ITP, presents certain nuances that warrant consideration. While desktop icons ultimately correspond to underlying data within the computer, the relationship is one of functional representation rather than a direct isomorphism. This raises a critical question. To what extent do our perceptual icons relate to an underlying reality? Are they merely simplified abstractions of a fundamentally different world? Or do they bear some more intricate relationship to it? And to what extent? Hoffman's subsequent development of conscious realism offers a deeper exploration into the nature of this underlying reality, suggesting a perspective that moves beyond traditional materialist views. So at the heart of the interface theory of perception lies the assertion that the primary goal of perception is not to furnish us with an accurate estimation of the world's true properties. Instead, perception's fundamental purpose is to guide our behavior in a way that maximizes our fitness within our specific ecological niche. This stance directly challenges the widely held principle of faithful depiction, which posits that the main function of perception is to recover or estimate the objective properties of the physical world. From an evolutionary standpoint, ITP argues that our perceptions have been shaped to act as a species-specific interface. Just as mentioned before, like different software programs have distinct interfaces tailored to their specific functions, different species facing unique survival challenges have evolved distinct perceptual interfaces suited to their particular needs. Furthermore, ITP proposes that the perceptual categories we employ to make sense of the world are not necessarily accurate reflections of objective reality, but rather satisfying solutions to fundamental problems such as finding food, securing mates, and avoiding predators. Such categories represent local maxima of fitness, meaning they are good enough solutions that have historically promoted survival, even if they do not perfectly align with the underlying structure of reality. This implies an evolutionary trade-off. Natural selection might favor quicker, less accurate perceptions if they lead to a faster and more frequent successful actions that enhance survival. The processing of highly detailed veridical information could be time and energy consuming. In situations demanding rapid responses, such as evading a threat, a swift, albeit potentially less precise perception that triggers an appropriate action could be far more beneficial for survival. So, this all begs the question, are you shut off from a world of information if that information has no bearing upon your survival? So, the desktop interface. To illustrate the core principles of ITP, Hoffman frequently employs the analogy of a computer desktop interface. In this analogy, space and time as we perceive them are likened to the desktop itself, providing the fundamental framework for our experience. The three-dimensional objects we perceive within this space-time are analogous to the icons on the desktop, just as we interact with icons to manipulate files and programs without needing to understand the complex circuitry and code operating behind the scenes. We interact with our perceptions of objects in space and time to navigate the world without needing to grasp its fundamental nature. Crucially, the visual properties of desktop icons, such as their position, shape, and color, bear no resemblance to the actual properties of the underlying digital file. A blue rectangular icon representing a text file does not mean the file itself is blue or rectangular in its digital form. Instead, the color and shape are useful symbols that allow us to quickly identify and interact with the file. Similarly, the appropriate question to ask about our perceptions is not whether they are a true representation of reality, but whether they are usefully related to the underlying reality in a way that promotes survival. The primary purpose of the interface, both on a computer and in our perception, is to hide the inherent complexity of the underlying system and provide simple, intuitive tools for effective interaction. As we would be paralyzed by the sheer volume of information if we had to directly perceive the intricate workings of a computer's integrated circuits or the fundamental constituents of reality every time we wanted to perform a simple task. And so the interface theory of perception emphasizes that the perceptual interfaces shaped by evolution are not universal, but instead tailored to the specific needs of each species. Different animals inhabiting the same environment may perceive it radically different ways based on their unique survival requirements. For instance, while humans possess the ability to see within the visible spectrum of light, bees have evolved the capacity to detect ultraviolet light, which guides them to nectar-rich flowers. Similarly, snakes can perceive infrared radiation, allowing them to detect warm-blooded prey even in complete darkness. These diverse sensory capabilities, which lie outside the realm of typical human perception, clearly illustrate that there is no single true way to perceive the world. Instead, perception is a highly adaptable process, finely tuned to the specific ecological niche and survival challenges faced by each organism. The very existence of such varied sensory systems across the animal kingdom strongly suggests that perception is not driven by a quest for a universal truth, but by the pragmatic imperative of niche-specific adaptations that enhance survival. What is crucial for a bee's survival, such as the ability to see UV patterns on flowers, is entirely irrelevant for a human survival in the same context, unless perhaps you have a fascination for flowers. The ITP is not merely a philosophical proposition. It is supported by rigorous mathematical analysis, most notably through the fitness-based truth theorem. This theorem mathematically demonstrates that under a wide range of conditions, natural selection will favor perceptual systems that maximize an organism's fitness, even if those perceptions are not accurate representations of objective reality. In fact, the FBT theorem shows that the probability of our perceptions accurately estimating the true properties of objective reality is remarkably low. In fact, so low, it is zero. This radical implication underscores the potential for a significant disconnect between our subjective experience of the world and its actual underlying nature. Evolutionary scenarios consistently reveal that a perceptual strategy focused solely on maximizing expected fitness payoffs without any attempt to perceive the true state of the world often leads to higher fitness outcomes compared to strategies that prioritize accuracy. This competitive advantage enjoyed by fitness-oriented perception provides a compelling explanation for why our senses might have evolved to conceal rather than reveal the truth of the world. The mathematical proof underpinning the FBT theorem lends substantial weight to Hoffman's theory, elevating it beyond the realm of pure philosophical speculation. The quantitative nature of the theorem offering a robust framework for understanding why non-veridical perception might just be the prevalent mode of sensory experience in the natural world. The FBT theorem further elucidates the specific conditions under which natural selection exerts stronger pressure against veridical perception. One such condition is the increasing complexity of the objective reality itself. In highly complex environments, organisms that simplify their perception to focus solely on information directly relevant to their fitness can make faster and more efficient decisions, ultimately leading to higher survival rates. Similarly, if the perceptual system required to process veridical information is itself complex and demands significant computational resources, natural selection might favor simpler, albeit potentially distorted, perceptual systems that yield a higher net fitness benefit. Furthermore, when the fitness payoffs associated with the different aspects of reality change rapidly over time, organisms that can quickly adapt and prioritize fitness-relevant cues will be more successful than those rigidly adhering to a truth-seeking strategy. The FBT theorem holds true even for dynamically changing fitness functions, highlighting the robustness of its principle. As many resources and environmental factors exhibit non-monotonic fitness functions, where both an excess and a deficiency can be detrimental to an organism's well-being. In such cases, perceiving the exact quantity of a resource might be less critical than perceiving whether the quantity falls within the optimal range for survival and reproduction. Consequently, natural selection would favor perceptual systems attuned to these optimal ranges rather than those providing precise but ultimately less relevant measurements. Finally, in competitive scenarios where organisms with different perceptual strategies vie for limited resources, the strategy that consistently yields the highest expected fitness will prevail, irrespective of whether the underlying perceptions are veridical. These identified conditions strongly suggest that veridical perception might be a relatively uncommon occurrence in the natural world. With the complexities and dynamic nature of real-world environments and fitness landscapes creating substantial selective pressures against purely truth-oriented perception. Importantly too, work elsewhere in neuroscience under the free energy principle speaks to the fact that all systems inherently have a limitation on the transfer of information across their sensory boundary. A crucial aspect of the FBT theorem lies in the understanding that fitness payoff functions are generally not homomorphisms of structures that exist in the observer-independent world. In simpler terms, the way the world is objectively structured does not necessarily translate into a directly proportional increase in an organism's fitness. The relationship between reality and its fitness consequences is often complex, non-linear, and context-dependent. Because natural selection operates by favoring perceptions and actions that lead to greater fitness payoffs, it follows that evolution will tend to shape our perceptions to be homomorphisms of the payoff function itself, rather than necessarily being homomorphisms, that is, accurate representations of the world as it is. We perceive the way in a world that reflects its impact on our survival and reproductive success, which can change across time and space. The mathematical analysis underpinning the FBT theorem further reveals that the probability of payoff functions being homomorphisms of fundamental structures such as total orders, permutation groups, cyclic groups, and measurable spaces approaches zero as the number of world states and payoff values increases, again providing mathematical support for the idea that our perceptions are highly unlikely to mirror reality in any direct or comprehensive way. So, what about optical illusions? The prevalence of optical illusions provides another clear indication that our visual perceptions are not always accurate reflections of the physical stimuli present in the world. Optical illusions reveal the active role our brains play in constructing our perception. Rather than passively receiving information from the environment, our brains actively interpret sensory input based on evolved heuristics, prior experiences, and contextual cues. While these interpretive processes are generally highly effective in helping us navigate the complexities of the world, they can sometimes lead to systematic errors in our perception, resulting in illusions where we perceive things differently from how they actually are. Illusions serve as a powerful reminder that our perception is a constructive process, and this construction is not always geared towards veridicality, but rather towards creating a useful and coherent representation that facilitates interaction and survival predicated on our priors. The fact that our brains can be so easily tricked by visual stimuli further supports the notion that truth is not the primary goal of perception. So, I mentioned conscious realism. The interface theory of perception serves as a foundational element within Donald Hoffman's broader philosophical framework, known as conscious realism. While ITP elucidates how our perception deviates from an objective reality by presenting us with a species-specific user interface, conscious realism ventures to offer a potential explanation for what that underlying reality might actually be made of. In a radical departure from traditional physicalist views, conscious realism posits that the objective world is not composed, or rather the world is not composed of unconscious particles and fields, but rather consists entirely of conscious agents and their experiences. This perspective suggests a fundamental shift in our understanding of reality, proposing that consciousness is not an emergent property of matter, but rather the very foundation of existence. This framework offers a potential answer to the profound question of what lies behind the user interface of our perception. If the fundamental nature of reality is indeed consciousness, then our perceptions can be understood as interfaces that allow conscious agents to interact with one another. The icons we perceive, the physical objects, and the space-time they inhabit are then interpreted as manifestations of these underlying interactions between conscious agents, a sort of grammar which enables such agents to communicate. For those philosophically minded will see similarities in the work of Schopenhauer, in which the will must communicate with itself via its different manifestations or representations. Further, one can see similarities with the work of Federico Fagin, whose work we will explore in another video. Within conscious realism, what we perceive as physical objects are not independent entities existing in a mind-independent world, but rather icons, or a multimodal user interface created by the interactions of these fundamental conscious agents. This implies that everyday objects such as tables, chairs, and even the moon exist only as experiences within the consciousness of observers. The moon you experience is not the same numerically as the moon of another person's experiences. They are distinct icons constructed within each individual's perception, or multimodal user interface. Further, consciousness realism suggests that space-time and the three-dimensional objects we perceive within it do not possess inherent causal powers and do not exist independently of being perceived, something which also aligns with another theory we will touch on in another video, integrated information theory. And so this all challenges our intuitive understanding of the physical world as a collection of objects with intrinsic properties that exist regardless of whether they are being observed. To provide a rigorous basis for conscious realism, Hoffman has developed a mathematical definition of a conscious agent and a formal framework for describing how these agents interact. This mathematical approach attempts to move beyond purely philosophical speculation and offers a model of reality based on consciousness as a fundamental element. The idea of conscious agents as the fundamental reality, interacting to create our perceived world, offers a novel perspective on the long-standing mind-body problem. Instead of attempting to explain how consciousness arises from physical matter, conscious realism proposes that physical matter, as we experience it, arises from the interactions of consciousness. This represents a radical inversion of the traditional view and opens up new avenues for understanding the relationship between mind and matter. So, some arguments against Hoffman's theory. Despite the compelling nature of Hoffman's arguments, his theories have also faced significant criticism. One central point of contention revolves around the premise that evolution favors veridicality. Critics argue that this premise is incorrect and that organisms survive precisely because they perceive and adapt to the true properties of the world around them. From this perspective, fitness is not decoupled from truth, but rather fundamentally dependent on it. For example, to effectively find food or avoid predators, an organism needs to perceive certain aspects of its environment with a degree of accuracy. Furthermore, some critics raise concerns about the self-defeating nature of radical skepticism based on evolutionary principles. They argue that evolutionary theory itself relies on some level of true perception. If evolution did not equip us with the capacity to perceive reality with a reasonable degree of accuracy, then the very basis for our understanding of evolution would be called into question. His work also raises the questions as to the definition of truth in the context of perception might needing to be seen as more nuanced. A pragmatist approach, for instance, might define veridical in the terms of utility. What works for survival is considered true in a functional sense. So to conclude, Donald Hoffman's interface theory of perception, supported by mathematical rigor of the fitness-based truth theorem, presents a compelling challenge to our traditional understanding of perception. The core argument that evolution prioritizes fitness over veridicality suggests that our senses have evolved to not reveal the objective truth of the world, but to provide us with a species-specific user interface that guides adaptive behavior. This perspective has profound implications for how we understand our place in the universe and the nature of reality. When coupled with Hoffman's broader theory of conscious realism, which posits that consciousness is the fundamental building block of reality, and that our perceived physical world arises from the interactions of conscious agents, it challenges the long-held assumptions of physicalism. While Hoffman's theories have faced criticisms, particularly regarding the relationship between fitness and truth and the self-referential nature of evolutionary arguments, they offer a powerful and thought-provoking framework for rethinking the very nature of our existence. Ultimately, his work encourages us to consider the possibility that the reality we perceive is not the ultimate truth, but rather a crafted one, shaped by the relentless pressures of natural selection. When considering his conscious realism, one might say evolution is balm and blossoming, yet in attempting to observe itself and limiting itself, it is bound to miss out on the bigger picture. If you enjoyed this episode of Existential Drips, please do subscribe, like and share this video. Most importantly though, see you next time with the next drip.